consider this a professional courtesy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to another one, folks. Real life has been playing its part over the last few weeks. As for those of you who've been listening for a long time, you know that I am the proud father to three wonderful fellows, now officially fellows, graduating from high school. So my oldest is now doing his thing, and my two remaining children, my twins, are graduating from high school, and they're going to be starting college this fall. So, of course, that frees me up to make a lot of interesting decisions relating to real estate, where I am, what I'm doing. And, you know, we've talked with folks on the show. We've talked, and I've had folks reach out to me who listen, who have decided to put themselves into build their empire mode, meaning they're going to do whatever it takes to minimize their monthly expenses so they can collect enough capital to invest in real estate, to make investing the thing. I'm finding myself very tempted by the same strategies. For those of you who are new to the show, I've floated a bunch of different ideas, you know, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with them, wrong with doing that, just off the top of your head, coming up with different ideas, letting new data influence the decisions that you make. But, and this is something I'm guilty of. I can't, when it comes to my own stuff, I can very easily fall into the category of paralysis by analysis, right? Spending too much time analyzing and then not going. I've had a variety of things going on, but, you know, listing them off would just be excuses at this point. I know what I want to do. I know what I need to do. It's just a question of putting it all into the right gears. I have been moving forward. I've gone full circle. Again, for those of you who've been listening for a while, you know this was the original plan, was to buy a lot, build on it, move to that, sell the home I currently live in, and use the proceeds from that to have the monthly expenses on the home I build be low enough that it's lower than what I'm paying now. So I'm boosting my monthly cash flow, right? That would be one goal, boost your monthly cash flow. And then take the remaining proceeds from that sale and invest. And I'd have a pretty good chunk of change to do that with. So, you know, all things that are still sort of in the works. And again, for those of you who've been paying attention, I'm behind on that plan by a good year at this point. And it all ended up working to the better. I don't think I would have been sad if I had executed in the timeline that I was hoping for, because my theory was that late last year, in October of last year, we were going to sort of see the first signs of a declining marketplace, or in things that would come into being that would serve to reduce the market. I was shooting for October. I thought we'd see a big hit in the stock market. We were seeing things like pension plans really suffering. We were seeing all these other things. And I thought October would be the month. I ended up being wrong. So my delay actually ended up working for me. Property values have appreciated to the point now where for instance, I posted photos, I think, of me remodeling my kitchen. And now that there's no question that that's paid for in terms of the amount of appreciation we've gotten over the last year. Now, today is an interesting show because we are continuing to hear the mantra of interest rates are negatively affecting sales. We're going to talk about that. I've got data to back this up, at least in my local area. So stay tuned for that. But we'll get into that in a minute. Before we do, let me remind everyone the best ways to get in contact with me. If you would like to reach out, feel free to head on over to therebelbroker.com. From there, you can send along any ideas, suggestions, observations, or questions that you might have. Happy to entertain them. Happy to, in fact, for those of you who share stuff directly with me, I enjoy being able to share real world stories on the show from those of you who listen. So it's a great way for us to communicate. I often get folks just talking back and forth. So feel free to join in. And again, you can do that at therebelbroker.com. You can also join the Rebel Underground by going to therebelbroker.com and clicking on any of the buttons on the site that say join the Rebel Underground. There's one on the player. There was a button right below the player center screen. So feel free to do that. And of course, there's one more button at the very tippy top of the homepage at therebelbroker.com, where you can take a survey to support the show. And by doing that, you'll also put yourself into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card. Now, we are going to do that in the first couple of weeks of June. We've been doing it every month for quite a while. I think we actually missed 1 month because of my horrible absenteeism over the last few weeks. But we're going to jump right back in and kick that back off in June. So if you haven't already gone to therebelbroker.com and click that Take the Survey to Support the Show button, do so. You'll get yourself into that drawing for an Amazon gift card, but you'll also be helping the show out. So take advantage of that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about data. I have been reading the stories of what's going on with lending and how all these different things, right, that are supposed to inform us that interest rates are now causing sales to slump. Well, we're going to look at that and see if that really makes sense, at least from the data I have access to from my multiple listing service. So let's get some ground truth, right? And what we'll talk about first are interest rates. Are interest rates higher than they have been over the last few years? Yeah, absolutely. Are they anywhere near where we would expect them to be to start to really kill sales? Well, maybe in some areas, but I can tell you categorically that in my area of California, and we're going to talk about Santa Clara County, which basically includes all of Silicon Valley, more or less. Those folks who live up on the peninsula are going to argue, and those folks in San Mateo and Menlo Park and all those areas are going to talk about how they're also tech cities. But Santa Clara County tends to be it. Santa Clara County includes all of those cities that we've talked about that have had crazy numbers: Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, Cupertino, San Jose, Los Gatos, my home of Morgan Hill, and going right up towards the peninsula. So a lot of different areas are covered in Santa Clara County. So it's not a small sample of data. So it's good data, right? And then I've also done a search where I include everything from north of San Francisco all the way over to Pleasanton, down all the way to Morgan Hill, and then across all the way over to south Los Gatos and all along the coast. So we're going to look at some data here. I don't want to get too wonky with it, but if I'm using my marketplace, which is where I have access to the most data, as a touchstone for what's going on with the marketplace, this idea that interest rates are really hitting sales is just not supported by the data. And you'll get all kinds of folks that are out there putting out news that interest rates are really killing things. Now, the first article I wanted to hit relating to this, the headline is "Existing Home Sales Tumble in April as Rate Hikes Crush Affordability." I've talked about this before. Just not really borne out by the data, to be really honest. Now, this one comes to us from the good folks at Zero Hedge. They state, following the April drop in new home sales amid record high average prices, remember, new home sales, existing home sales tumbled 2.5% month over month, considerably worse than the 0.9% drop that was expected. Well, that's also because we have low inventory. We are getting more listings now in my area, but as you'll see from the data I'm going to present, that's normal. You're going to see that we have a cycle where in this crazy market, and we've had this crazy market now for 2.5 years, we're going to look at the data going back a couple of years, and you'll be able to see that this is normal. We hit periods where you get more listings than you get sales. That's actually the way it's normally supposed to work. And then when we look at the critical number of months of inventory, we just aren't seeing what you would expect if there was some big hit on people wanting to get loans. Now, also remember, previous data we discussed on this show indicated that only 6% of buyers said that an interest rate hike up to 5% would cause them to even think twice about getting a loan. And I'll be honest, in the buyers I deal with, nobody has said, I'm going to be not buying because of interest rates. I've had conversations with folks where there's been the consideration of lowering their total purchase price in order to accommodate an increased interest rate. But I think I've had that conversation literally with one or two people over the last 2 months. So it's not a big, and they haven't done it. They're still looking to purchase at the exact same purchase price. So I'm just not seeing the impact here. So in terms of me just sharing what I'm seeing, I'm not seeing what the press is pushing, that interest rates are the thing. I continue to push the idea that right now, inventory is the thing. That is it. You solve the inventory problem, you solve the high price problem, you solve all these other problems. And I would argue that at least in my marketplace, I'm not seeing homes staying on the market longer. Just again, not supported by the data at all. All right, so what have interest rates done? Let's take a look. The 30-year fixed rate mortgage right now, today, is at 4.61%, and it's actually down 0.06%. Now, yes, that is high. That's probably in the top 20% of the 52-week average. The low of the 52-week average for that is 3.84%. The high is 4.79%. So we are not even at the highest it has been in the last year. All right? So calibrate yourself to that. We are not at the highest rate for any of these. The 15-year fixed rate mortgage is currently at 4.04. The highest it's been in the last 52 weeks, 4.22. The FA and the other thing I'd want to point out is even at these peaks over the last 52 weeks, we still saw robust sales. The FHA 30-year fixed rate is at 4.4. All of them are down 0.02. The only one that's up is the 5-1-year adjustable rate mortgage, and I still hold the opinion that a adjustable rate mortgage is not smart to get right now. The jumbo 30-year fixed is at 4.65%, and it peaked at 4.81 over the last 52 weeks. And then the 5-1 adjustable rate is at 3.95, up. That's the only one that's up 0.03%. To 3.95 with a 52-week high of 4.0. So it's the highest among them all. What's the sweet spot? What is the point at which people start making different decisions about buying real estate? You know what? To be honest, I don't know. Is it 5%? Is it 5.5%? Is 6% the magic number? I don't know, but I can tell you that all the claims that interest rates are what are doing something negative or that sales are low because of interest rates are absolutely not reading the data correctly. And we're going to fix that by looking at data from a variety of different angles today. The National Association of Realtors reported that existing home sales slid 2.5% in April. Quote, after moving upward for 2 straight months, existing home sales retreated in April on both a monthly and annualized basis, according to the National Association. All 4 major regions saw no gain in sales activity last month. Total existing home sales, which are completed transactions that include single-family homes, townhomes, condominiums, and co-ops, decreased 2.5% to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 5.46 million in April, from 5.60 million in March. With last month's decline, sales are now 1.4% below a year ago and have fallen year over year for 2 straight months. Total housing inventory at the end of April increased 9.8% to 1.8 million existing homes available for sale, but is still 6.3% lower than a year ago and has fallen year over year for 35 consecutive months. Unsold inventory is at a 4-month supply, according to them, for the entire country. Okay, so we've got that as data, as a backdrop. So what's the truth I'm seeing on the ground here in my area? Well, let's go ahead first and talk about, again, Santa Clara County, number of new listings versus number of sold listings. Now, if you look back to January, you can see that we've had far more new listings than we've had sales. For instance, in January of 2018, we had 651 sales and 1,040 listings. In February, 792 new listings with 792 sales with 1,309 new listings. In March, we had 1,252 sales, 1,607 new listings. In April, we had 1,866 new listings, and we had 1,252 sales. Also keep in mind dramatic increases for every single month that we've seen from January to now. We've seen an increase in the number of homes sold, but we've also seen an increase in the number of homes listed. And then finally, we've ended up in April with 1,866 new listings and 1,393 total sales. So, wow, maybe that's our trend, right? Maybe what we can say is things are going nuts in terms of we're seeing consecutive months where we're getting more homes listed than we are getting homes sold. Well, that only holds water right up until you start looking at the same time last year when the exact same thing happened. But here's the difference. We're selling more homes now than we were last time, and we're not listing as many as we did last time, at least for many months. Or for some months, it's almost a complete wash. If we go back to January of 2017, for instance, we listed 1,024 versus 1,040 in January of 2018. But we sold 737 and we sold 651. So there's a little bit of a separation there. But if you look through the following months, we've actually got really the same phenomenon, but the ratio between number of homes listed and the number of homes sold is even more narrow. So we are seeing sales taking up far more of the new inventory than we did in just a year ago. And think back to last year. Was last year some sort of downturn where folks were really able to get a good deal? No. January through July of last year was a bloodbath for buyers as they continued to crank out more and more money to purchase homes. So when do we start to see things turning around? And this is the other big problem. When we start to see sales outpacing the listings, and it eats it all up. From the month of June last year all the way through till December, we had home sales way outpacing new listings. In December of 2017, for instance, we had 552 new listings with 1,018 sold homes. So it clearly ate into the existing inventory. We sold almost twice as many homes as we listed. In November, it was 945 new homes listed and 1,181 homes sold. And then it stays relatively narrow on that same basis going all the way back to June. But we're not seeing a deviation from that trend. I see nothing in this that indicates there is a backing away on the part of buyers from the marketplace. Now, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about some other interesting numbers relating to sales price to list ratio, months of inventory for both Santa Clara County and for the entire area from north of San Francisco all the way south to my area. But we're going to talk about that in just a second, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner, broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. We are putting a little rational analysis behind my contention that interest rates continue to be a non-issue relating to sales, at least in my area. Clearly, in some markets, this may be playing a part. I'm not going to say it's a national trend, but I'll tell you what. From other folks in the real estate business that I'm talking to that are in Los Angeles, that are in Atlanta, that are in New York, that are in these other areas, the current interest rate for borrowing is not the issue. And I think the one reason why I keep harping on this is because it diverts attention away from the real solution. The real solution is getting out of the way of builders and making it possible for them to simply build stuff that folks can afford. All this stuff they're doing, and particularly in California, where they're mandating that in 2020 we have to have solar power on homes, that may be a great feel-good move. But when you're increasing the price of a home from $10,000 to $30,000, where you're only going to recoup about 50% of that in terms of lowered costs to your PG&E bill, your electrical bill, it becomes sort of a goofy idea. We already talked about that on a previous show. Doing things like this where you mandate these things also tends to cause stagnation in a marketplace where, the only way they get better sales is when they improve the product. Well, if you make it so you don't have to improve the product to sell it, then they stop improving the product. And that's a thing that goes for everything, regardless of whether we're talking about solar power or anything else. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some other data here. One other thing that I have is months of inventory. I have two graphs that I'll be sharing at the website, therebelbroker.com. Both of them look nearly identical because the trend is the same. One is for all of Santa Clara County, and I'm including the stuff, the things that feed the data, so you can know what I'm talking about. And one of them you'll see includes as its location. One will say County SCC Santa Clara, and that's Santa Clara County. The other one will say latitude, longitude, and that's because I've chosen the area all the way from north of San Francisco all the way down to my area to get this. I tried doing just the entire system, but it choked. It was incapable of generating the graph because there was so much data to plug. But what you'll see is a trend in terms of total months of inventory. We are at the lowest point of months of inventory, and a lower number means bad things, right? It means that if we stopped listing homes right now, how long it would take to sell them all off, to sell off the inventory. In the last 3 years, in Santa Clara County, the only other year where it has been lower was in late 2017. We are at just about the second, just past the second lowest point, and on a bit of a rise, but we are still at less than 1 month. We are at something like 0.6 months. 3 weeks? We're at about 3 weeks worth of inventory. That's insane. And again, you can see this data at the website. So that just informs you if we get the same sort of sales and listing trends that we've seen, and there's no reason to suspect a change. Remember, over the past year, we had higher interest rates than what we're currently seeing. So it's illogical to assume that a lower rate than what the peak was over the last year is somehow causing more people to back away from the market. It just doesn't make sense, right? We've already been to a lower point of interest rates during the last year, where we saw insane performance, and we're seeing more insane performance than that now. So that's months of inventory. For Santa Clara County, as I said, we're right at about 3 weeks. If we look at the entire area, going from just north of San Francisco all the way down to my area, that goes up a little bit, maybe 3.5 weeks, but still the trend is really very much the same. All right, now let's take a look at the next number. And this is something I like to look at because it really calibrates you to activity levels, right? And this is a chart that gives you the average days on market with the graph showing the list price ratio. And that is the ratio of how much people paid versus the asking price, right? So 100% would mean that if you listed your home for $100,000, you got $100,000 for it, right? Okay. So we are currently sitting at about, in terms of list price ratio, about 113%. Now, this is going all the way back to May of 2017, and for the data that we're looking at. And there are two things to take away from this chart. One, we are at the second highest list price ratio ever since May of 2017. And we are at the lowest days on market number since May of 2017. Now, we've had the same low number for both March and April, sitting at 13 days. So the average home in Santa Clara County sells in 13 days. You know that during this time frame, because I mentioned it last time, I sold a house in 4 days. The market is insane. The rush for folks to get properties is still on. Now, if we take a look at that list price ratio, it's right now at about 113%, which is only off by a very little bit, maybe a half of a percentage point from last month, which is the highest it has ever been since May of 2017. Yet another indicator that we are not seeing a slowing down. We might see a slowing down as it relates to the ratio that folks are paying for homes, but we're not seeing a slowdown in how fast these homes are selling, or for the fact that they're all selling for at least 112% over asking price. What we're paying is 112% of asking price. So 12% over, right? Just another thing to point to. Next on our list of things to look at is the same number, sale to list price ratio, but by itself. And I wanted to do this one a little deeper because it reveals an interesting trend with a locomotive style trend in 2017. And when you see the chart, if you decide to head on over to therebelbroker.com to look at the chart, you can see for yourself. We've got interesting peaks. So I went ahead and ran these numbers going all the way back to 2015. Now in 2015, in the first half of the year, we saw a peak creeping up to almost 108%. Then in 2016, we saw another peak. It declines and then peaks again in the first half of 2016 up to about 105%. Then it drops, and again in January. So every first half of the year, you see this jump in sale to list price ratio. What happened in 2017 is it jumped up to just shy of 106% and never went down. It started to increase in January of 2017, and it has basically increased nonstop ever since. We did not get the second half of the year downturn that we usually got. So, for instance, in 2015, we were almost at 108%, and just before the end of the year, we bottomed out at about 103%. Then in the first half of 2016, we peaked up to about 105%, and then by the end of the year, we had dropped to below 102%. But then from there, it just skyrocketed and basically took us up to just over 113%, which is where we are now. Now, remember, I already mentioned that we talked about the 52-week average for loans, and we've already hit the peak. We are not at the peak for the last 52 weeks. And yet, despite the fact that we had this peak sometime in the last 52 weeks, which would take us back to this time last year, we see no abatement in terms of the increase, the amount people are offering over asking price. Now, why is that a focus? Why am I not just giving you average sales price? Because this indicates the frenzy that's involved. The amount over asking price indicates multiple buyers. It is the hallmark number that tells you, well, there must have been more than one person bidding on that house because it sold for well over 100% of asking price, right? That's just sort of a logical conclusion to come to. And that's what this chart reveals. All right, so next, let's talk about the days to sell over time. And I'm not going to put this chart up separately, but again, 13 days is what we're seeing. So what does this all tell us? All this data together, and again, you can check it all out at therebelbroker.com, and it'll be included in the show notes for today's show. The reality is, it's not interest rates. And you know what? It shouldn't be interest rates. Historically, if we go back the last 40 years of interest rates, we are at ridiculously low interest rates. Things aren't even going to get close to being normal until we get much closer to a 10% interest rate. I mean, when I first got into this business, interest rates were 15%, 16%, and I would hear, and just before I got in, interest rates were up closer to 20%. So, and I remember when interest rates broke 10%, when they went from 10.2 down to 9.8, and everything went nuts. Everyone completely plotzed and bought up everything that they possibly could. I realized that there's not a lot of historical reference for people today. Most folks who are buying right now probably weren't even around when interest rates were that high. So, or a lot of the folks don't even remember. So I get that. I get that you've gotten used to what interest rates are. So the interesting thing is to figure out at what point does it hit? And does it? Or is this simply the reality that folks find themselves dealing with? So how do we take that as folks in this market? Well, I think what we do is realize that we are now at a ridiculous peak in terms of people offering over asking price, when we have consistently, since the beginning of 2018, been offering at least 10% above asking price consistently. And think about that. I mean, if that's a $100,000 house, that's $10,000. If it's $1 million house, that's $100,000. None of this feeds any beast in the fight that says interest rates are what are causing any issues relating to inventory. In fact, there is nothing that indicates we're having problems with inventory. We are historically low supply in terms of months of supply. None of these things are being revealed, and yet everyone's trying to say that the problem is interest rates, or that interest rates are going to start to slow things down. What's also interesting, and this is something else I wanted to bring up. I don't know if you do the same thing I do. I use all the sites out there: Zillow, Trulia, Redfin, all of them, and I'm on the little list for my zip code for Zillow. And every single month, they keep telling me it's great to be a buyer in Zillow. In Morgan Hill, in my zip code, which makes no sense at all. I'm not sure what algorithm Zillow is using, but it is not a good time to be a buyer in Morgan Hill. There's always multiple offers, no matter the condition of the property. I have seen horrible homes go for above asking price that shouldn't have. So I don't get it. I don't understand why there seems to be this bizarre. It's almost like they're trying to convince you of something, right? It's that used car salesman gig where everyone's saying, oh, well, you better buy now because interest rates or whatever, when the real problem here, and what really gets me is for a while we had hope, right? If you've been listening for a while, over a year ago, we started seeing more articles coming out that inventory was the problem. And we even had some big name journalists, big name outlets talking about how the government and regulators needed to get out of the way of buyers and let these things get built for a more economical proposition for builders. Now, remember, we've talked about this. Over 30% of the cost of the home you buy is due to regulation. That's a big number. And I'm not even suggesting go to no regulation. I'm suggesting let's go back to the regulations of the year 2000. We saw a ridiculous increase in regulations and costs associated with building after the year 2000 as governments kind of wanted to get in on the frenzy of real estate. Well, of course, none of those fees or regulations got eliminated when the market took a downturn. And I believe just about completely that the reason we did not see the resurgence in construction, which remember is still at about a quarter of what it was at the peak. So nobody in the world of building has stepped up to fill the demand for housing, which is one reason why we have such crazy inventory problems. And when we do see them building, because the regulatory costs are so high and because of the desire to recoup those costs, they end up building homes that are at the higher end. Now, we saw for a while people seeming to say the things that I'm suggesting, that we need to address the inventory problem. We need to let builders build. We need to make it possible for them to build less expensive homes. But all of the focus has been on multifamily. It's been on apartments. It's been on high density condo style stuff. And that's just not what the demand is for. Will folks do that? Well, folks might just do what they have to do, but the reality is that still those regulatory costs are in there. So you end up paying an extremely bloated price based on regulations, even if you're buying a condo. And then, of course, a whole bunch of folks seem to be continuing to bank on apartment complexes, whether you're talking about the new stuff that just went up in Gilroy or you're talking about that gigantic apartment complex right off of the 85 freeway in southern San Jose. That seems to be where most of the work is happening. And it's also where most of the builders are building. And we need to move away from that. All right. So now it's the strategy time. What do we do? Is there a way to solve this problem? Well, I think the reality is continue to use your math. Now, if you're just a buyer trying to buy, it's tough. You need to figure out how to make things happen for yourself in real estate that can work out for you. Now, one thing would be to consider purchasing a multifamily property and living in one of them, where they're talking about a duplex, a tri, or a quad, and then rent out the other ones to defray the cost. That's absolutely an area I'm actively looking in. Potentially consider the possibility of building your own home in some of these crazy markets. Now, these are marketplaces where you can still get lots, but some of them are insanely overpriced. I was looking at a lot in East San Jose over the weekend that wanted $650,000 for the lot. It does have a structure on it, but it's not only is it not safe to live in, you're not even allowed to go in it. It would need to be bulldozed. So you not only need to buy the lot and then bulldoze the existing structure, then you need to build a new one. By the time you're done, you're over $1 million easily in terms of what you're having to finance. Now, does that make sense in that marketplace? Yeah, it might. Homes are selling for that price and more. And it would have an amazing view. So you definitely have a home that's worth more than what you paid. But again, we're talking insane numbers here. You can find deals in other areas where it makes sense to do these things. And that's usually one area where you can save some money if you're willing to take on the stress of going through a construction process. The other way to go is to start shopping for properties that are The more ignored properties, 2-bedroom homes are a good example of this. You can tend to save a little money, and I'm now looking actively for these properties, but I'm specifically looking for properties where it's a 2-bedroom with enough of a area left on the lot that I could add a 3rd bedroom if I wanted to. The amount of equity you would get out of that kind of an enhancement on a property in this marketplace would more than pay for itself. As long as you're doing the math. Don't assume that. You're going to want to make sure that you're buying it correctly to make that a reality. The other option is to just don't do it. The reality in this marketplace is that everything is cyclical. At some point, this is going to go down. Given the run-up we've seen over the last year just in homes being sold above list price, you got to think we're hitting a point where the market itself is going to collapse under its own weight. Just whatever other things we've talked about, whether we want to talk about pensions or deficit spending or printing money or all these other things that we've talked about that could potentially negatively impact the real estate market, everything's on a cycle, and we are due for a downturn. So what would be my advice? Well, potentially do what I'm considering doing and take the equity you have. If you own a property, take the equity out, use that money to invest in a different marketplace with a higher return on investment. This is not a marketplace that lends itself to you getting the return that you would want on an investment. The numbers just don't work. And that's one reason why when we cover these articles that talk about highest rates of return in various markets, we never see Sunnyvale, San Francisco, San Jose. These don't tend to be the places that are providing those returns because you need to pump in a whole lot of money just to get positive cash flow. And that positive cash flow, you're earning $1,000 by having many hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially $1 million invested. And that's just not putting your money to work for you in a way that makes sense. So it becomes about finding other marketplaces where you can do that. All right, folks. I hope it's been valuable for you. I know the mainstream media is really kind of pushing this whole interest rate thing. That isn't it. I hope these numbers at least give you some insights into that and maybe inspire you to look at these same numbers in your area to see what the truth really is, because good numbers make for good real estate decisions. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to y'all next time.